In this video, we're going to look at topic 22, example 1, where we graph a system of inequalities. So we're asked what are the solutions to the system of linear equalities, and we're given two examples. This is very, very similar to the last section. The only difference is that you're graphing two inequalities on the same plane, the same coordinate plane, and you're looking for where those two graphs overlap. Okay, so we'll start with the first one. We're going to look at y is greater than x minus 2. I'm going to put this one in blue. So here, remember we start with our y-intercept, which in this case would be -2. We then have a slope of 1 over 1. So I would rise 1, run 1, plot my second point. It's just greater than, there's no equal bar, so I'm going to use a dotted line for this specific inequality. And so we have our inequality there, and then we need to figure out where we're going to shade. So we want greater than. So remember, greater than would be above, so we would draw an arrow up. That tells us where we want to shade. So for the first inequality, I'm going to shade everything kind of this top portion of my inequality, or sorry, of my graph. So we're just going to connect all of that. Shade this as best we can. Well, that wasn't supposed to happen. Okay, so we've plotted that first one, or shaded that first one. That's the solution to our first inequality. Now, our second inequality is this one here. So what we just did is what we did in the last section, right? We plotted a single line, and then we shaded either above or below. So now we're going to do the same thing. We're just going to put a second inequality within the same coordinate grid. So this time our y-intercept is a +1. Our slope is -1, so we'd have a rise where we go down 1 and then run 1, and we'd have a point right here. This one is equal to, so we have less than or equal to, so this time we would need a solid line. So I'm going to connect these dots here with a solid line, probably one of the best lines I've drawn. And then we want to shade the region. In this case, we want to go below, right, because it's less than. So the arrow would go down, so that tells us which part of the graph to shade. So we'll shade everything below that line here. And then you have the second inequality graphed. Okay, so we have this. Now, as for your actual solution, so everything that's shaded blue is the solution to the first inequality. Everything shaded red is the solution to the second inequality. Since we're looking at a system of inequalities, we're looking at where they overlap. So our actual solution is this region here, where both the blue shaded region, or the blue inequality, and the red inequality are both true statements. Okay, so all those points satisfy both inequalities. You also could, if you wanted to, instead of shading, I'm just going to draw a really rough sketch here. Instead of shading both of them, you could have something that looks, we'll say something like that, and then you could shade only the shared region, okay, this region here. So if you're going to shade the solution, you can do it as this little sketch here, that's fine. If you're going to shade how I did in the first part of it, where you have both inequalities shaded, make sure it's very clear where they overlap. Okay, so either shade it in darker, maybe use vertical lines for one of them and then horizontal lines for the other, so you get sort of like a grid in there. But whatever method you use, make sure it's very clear which section is the shared region. Okay, so we're going to do the same thing for part B. Just to give another example, so we have a y-intercept. I'll go through this rather a little more quickly. A y-intercept of 2. Slope is going to be -1, so we're going to go down 1 over 1. And this one is equal to, so we have a solid line. So I'm going to draw a line through these points here, and my graph would look something like that. It is greater than, so I would shade above, right? We have that arrow going up. So let's fill that piece in. Okay, so we have this first region shaded in. That would be the solution to our first inequality. Our second inequality, y-intercept of -2, we actually have the same slope here, and that's going to be important, of -1, so we go down 1 over 1. However, this time we want a dotted line. So let me just try to make this accurate. So we'd have a dotted line here, and then it's less than, so you want the shaded region below. So we're going to shade in that bottom portion. We'll take here. All right, now notice in this specific example, there is no overlap. Okay, the red region is on that bottom left, and the blue region is on that top right, and they do not overlap. So the solutions to a system of linear inequalities, an actual system, is where the two overlap. The solution to the blue one is that top, the red one is that bottom, but there's no overlap. So for this specific problem, there's actually no solution to the system. Okay, so make sure you kind of take note of that, because again, we're looking for overlapping regions. There is no overlapping region in example B. So that means there will be no solution to that inequality, or sorry, to that system of inequalities.